How are you? Thank you for joining us. My name is Woo Jung-yeop, and I'm the Vice President for Research and Planning and also the Director of the Center for the American Studies here at the Sejong Institute. I sincerely appreciate your joining us this morning in Seoul and evening in the East Coast of the United States. It's been 2 years since the Singapore summit between Trump and Kim in 2018. There was some progress, but not as much as we hoped it to be. And the series of the statement recently made by DPRK is not really constructive. Thus, today we invited top experts from both Korea and the United States to discuss US DPRK negotiations after the 2018 Singapore Agreement, how to make progress. So here is the list of our participants in alphabetical order in their last name. We have Dr. Jeon Bong-keun, a professor at the Department of Security and Unification Studies at the Institute of Foreign Affairs and National Security in the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Dr. Jeon Bong-keun.
Good morning and good afternoon.
We have Dr. Kim Ji-na, a research fellow at the Korea Institute for Defense Analysis and adjunct professor at Yonsei Graduate School of International Studies. Dr. Kim?
Hi, good to see you.
And we have Dr. Adam Mount, senior fellow and the director of the Defense Posture Projects at the Federation of American Scientists. Adam?
Hello, good evening here.
And we have Dr. Vipin Narwang, Associate Professor of Political Science at MIT and a member of MIT's Security Studies program. Vipin?
Thanks for having me.
And we have Mr. Park Jang-ho, Deputy Director General of North Korea Nuclear Affairs Bureau at the Republic of Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Park?
Good morning. Thank you for having me here.
And we have Dr. Terence Rorick, Professor of National Security Affairs and the Director of the Asia Pacific Studies Group at the U.S. Naval War College. Terry.
Greetings, and thank you for the invitation.
And we have Dr. Sung Ki-young, a Senior Research Fellow at the Security Strategy Research Division in the Institute for National Security Strategy.
Hello, nice to see you all.
And we have Ms. Jung Jae-yoon from JTBC for this event. Ms. Jung.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
Let's get it started. For our meeting that I have asked of our panelists 2 questions in advance. One is, under what conditions would the US and DPRK resume their diplomatic dialogue? And what should be the priority in dealing with DPRK's growing nuclear capability? So without further ado, I'm going to invite our panelists to share their insights. First, I'll ask Dr. Jeon Bong-keun, please.
Yes, I just wanted to make a couple of general statements on these issues. As all of us, like all of us, we have observed these North Korean nuclear problems for decades. And I come to a certain, a couple conclusions that I found a certain trend that's very interesting. First, there was a vicious cycle of US DPRK nuclear negotiations. It starts with the DPRK provocation, crisis, nuclear agreement, and the collapse of nuclear agreement. Then makes one cycle. When I, counted them, there was already 8 cycles. So, that happens. It's just, so I was thinking that we are just in the middle of another cycle. It didn't really completely collapse, but we are in the certain stage, whether it's going to collapse or are going to make a further progress. And secondly, another trend that I find very troubling was that DPRK nuclear capabilities increase or doubles every 8 years roughly. So even at this time, as we are just, both sides are hesitating, engaging in dialogue, DPRK is continuously increasing its nuclear capabilities. So in a few years, they may come up with much more nuclear weapons. That leads to my own kind of conclusion that it's always cheaper to make a nuclear agreement than today than tomorrow. So then your question was, when do we start the nuclear negotiations? I think the primary reason from the DPRK for backtracking from this dialogue was that their own, I think, frustration. When they engage in a dialogue, they persuaded their people that we are going to somehow slow down nuclear armament, but we will have economic development. That's what Kim Jong-un promised to his people to deliver. But as he was engaging in a dialogue, of course, he was not really ready to give up the weapons. But while you are somehow slowing down, freezing, or all those activities, I think he was thinking that he couldn't deliver his promises to his people. So I think he's showing much hard line these days. I think it's one way of kind of making excuses to the people. So I believe that when there should be, DPRK should be ready to make some concrete commitment on certain denuclearization measures. But also from our side, we should be ready to provide some, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, or some exemptions on economic sanctions. Without that, when U.S. was saying that, we are going to get everything what we want, but we are not going to make any concession on these sanctions, then there is no reason for DPRK to continue dialogue. So when U.S. is ready to, provide some sanctions relief, I don't think, removal of sanction is possible or desirable, but some partial exemptions during DPRK certain reciprocal denuclearization activities. In those cases, we probably could get DPRK come to the table. Nowadays, people are saying DPRK is in a serious food crisis, economic crisis, and also medical crisis could be there. So all those incentives is probably what DPRK want to have. And also, what DPRK really want, I think probably is that really serious progress in U.S. DPRK diplomatic relations, but we haven't seen much. So all those things, there could be some materialistic, but some could be just symbolic. That could get the DPRK come to the table. And also last time at the Hanoi, when DPRK was said that they are ready to give up the Yongbyon site, I thought that the Yongbyon site was has some real material kind of package there. I think also, but somehow there was a lot of noise from outside that this is just all the remaining, it's a useless site. So I think when the DPRK is ready to give up something, then we just take it and we are ready to provide something in response to that. In those kind of kind of responsible relations from both sides could help us to move toward a much better diplomatic negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Vipin, please.
Thank you all. Great to see everybody from the evening here in Boston. So we're 2 years after the Singapore summit. And in a lot of ways, the Singapore summit was revolutionary. It was criticized in the United States and worldwide because President Trump decided to upend the diplomatic process. And instead of approaching it bottom up, decided to approach it top down. And the theory there had some merit in the sense that bottom up approaches had essentially failed for a quarter century before between the United States and North Korea, whether through the six-party talks or bilaterally. And the the idea or theory behind upending the process is that if you could get Kim Jong-un to buy in on some sort of framework or process, then you can implement it from the top to the bottom. And there was a real opportunity 2 years ago, but I put a lot of the onus on the blame in the past 2 years, where we now find the diplomatic talks in essentially a coma on the United States, because it didn't take the framework that it agreed to at Singapore seriously, or it seems to me, read it carefully. You know, the sequence of steps in the Singapore Declaration to establish a new framework of trust and peace between the United States and North Korea, and then work towards complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, seemed intentional. It seemed obvious, and the Trump administration didn't take those sequence of steps seriously and expected North Korea to essentially unilaterally surrender its nuclear weapons, which Kim Jong-un had never agreed to do, despite what Secretary Pompeo continues to insist, that Chairman Kim agreed to the final fully verified denuclearization of North Korea at Singapore. Frankly, as an academic, I can say this, I'm not in any government. It's a blatant lie. Kim Jong-un never agreed to that. And insofar as Kim Jong-un was concerned, there was an expectation that there would be so-called corresponding steps in exchange for what Kim Jong-un believed were reversible but visible steps in terms of slowing down the growth of his nuclear weapons program or improvement of his nuclear weapons program. And that included a moratorium on at least ICBM tests and a shuttering of the Punggye-ri nuclear testing site. And so, much to his surprise, I imagine, there were no corresponding steps, which seemed to include mostly focusing on sanctions relief. And the theory, I think, behind the Trump administration's approach, which was misguided, was that time benefited the United States, and that maximum pressure and the sanctions regime would eventually cause Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans to buckle and give up its nuclear weapons because the economy was in such dire straits that it had no option. The reality was that time actually benefited North Korea more than it benefited the United States, because after the Singapore Declaration and summit, the Chinese and the Russians essentially took all of the air out of the maximum pressure campaign. And whatever extent the United States could unilaterally, along with its allies, impose sanctions on North Korea, the Chinese and the Russians essentially ensured that Kim Jong-un and North Korea would never be so desperate that it would fall to its knees. And I think the theory there for the Chinese is essentially that it still fears a collapsed North Korea more than it fears a nuclear North Korea. And so what has Kim Jong-un done with his time? He's improved his nuclear force. Today we saw reports that, you know, we're seeing several new ICBMs and transporter-erector launchers in North Korea. Kim Jong-un never said that he wouldn't stop. And in 2018 New Year's Day speech, he said he'll continue to expand and improve his nuclear arsenal. In fact, we should take Kim Jong-un's words very seriously because he's always lived up to his promises. And the North Korean missile force in the intervening 2 years has expanded, both in terms of ICBMs and short-range missiles. It has improved. President Trump and the Trump administration may wave off the short-range rocket tests or ballistic missile tests or whatever you want to call those roses. The KN-23, the KN-24, KN-25 are mobile, they're solid fuel, they can maneuver in flight, and they are terrifying, I think, for regional missile defenses. And some of the technologies, particularly solid fuel and maneuverability in flight, may find themselves in the long-range missiles. And so the tests of even the short-range missiles have implications for the broader missile and nuclear force. Kim Jong-un has never, there's no evidence that North Korea has stopped enriching uranium. There's no evidence they've stopped producing nuclear weapons. There's certainly no evidence that they've stopped producing ICBMs and TELs. And the real moment this came to a head was February of last year at the Hanoi summit. I think we'll look back with regret in the United States at the failure of the Hanoi summit, because to get to the second main question, which is how do we move forward, or what do we want with an agreement with North Korea? Hanoi was really the outlines of what a concrete agreement might have looked like that I think was good for both sides. And the real aim, is to first slow the program down. So, shunting off the known plutonium production sites at the Yongbyon facility, fabrication facilities, some non-trivial proportion of uranium enrichment at Yongbyon, even if it leaves the undeclared sites untouched, is not nothing. And it would measurably slow down the growth of the North Korean nuclear weapons program and missile program. And if that was really on the table, as reports suggest they were at Hanoi, and President Trump walked away, not just because of the scoping of the agreement, right, because it didn't include the undeclared sites, but also the sequencing, North Korea reasonably could have expected, if we're going to put all of Yongbyon on the table, there've got to be some measures along the way, corresponding measures along the way. And President Trump, I think, expected Kim Jong-un to go all the way first, essentially hollow out and bomb out Yongbyon before there was any sanctions relief whatsoever. And that was obviously a non-starter for Kim Jong-un. And so there's not only the question at Hanoi of the scope of the agreement, whether it covered undeclared sites or not, but the sequencing of the agreement, who would go first. And those sticking points, along with Michael Cohen's testimony in front of Congress, seem to have led to President Trump walking away. But I think we'll look back at Hanoi with regret as one of the last opportunities to really slow down the North Korean nuclear program if Yongbyon in its totality was really on the table. And personally, I would have been willing to give up quite a bit, including most of the post-2016 sanctions for Yongbyon, because at the end of the day, the maximum pressure campaign really had no air in it anyway. So in effect, you were getting a visible and measurable reduction in the growth of the North Korean nuclear program for not much in return substantively. So where are we now? Nothing substantively has happened between President Trump and Kim Jong-un as far as we can tell since Hanoi, despite promises of trying to get the talks restarted. I think Kim Jong-un was understandably probably mystified and perhaps humiliated after Hanoi domestically, and that led to a quiet period, I think, from the North Koreans. As the Trump administration tried to jumpstart the process with Trump's historic visit to North Korea last summer, there didn't seem to be a lot of receptivity in North Korea, and we're talking about a new strategic system. We're talking about new ICBMs. And for now, I'm not sure that before November 2020, especially with the pandemic and President Trump facing re-election, there will be much more in this administration between North Korea and President Trump, although both seem to be fans of surprises. So I never say never. But going forward, I think the contours of what the deal looked like remain the same, which is how do we essentially trade some semblance of sanctions relief with snapback provisions and everything for first slowing down the North Korean nuclear program, fissile material production, capping ICBM production, and learning to live and manage a nuclear North Korea on the basic assumption that Kim Jong-un is not going to voluntarily relinquish his nuclear weapons, and taking them away by force is essentially a recipe for a nuclear conflict with a nuclear weapons power. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vipin. Next, Dr. Kim Jina, please.
Thank you. I think for the future negotiation, either the US or North Korea should widen their windsets, the range of options acceptable domestically and negotiable internationally between the two. We all know that there is no shared windset at this point. For the US, accommodating domestic demands to eliminate comprehensive threats from North Korea and securing support from the Congress possibly to make a successful, sustainable agreement will just keep the US windset so rigid. And North Korea is also not in a position to make any significant modifications to its demand of early lifting of sanctions and ending of hostile policies to the regime. What Chairman Kim would face is not just like a democratic accountability, but I believe the leadership in Pyongyang cannot be entirely immune from those political cost that can be incurred by backing down from the public commitment, that is boosting the economy by lifting sanctions. That's one of the reasons why we see these days that North Koreans are railing around the flag, chanting a new political slogan, etc. By doing so, the leadership in Pyongyang can show to the world that its windset is so rigid and rather ask the others, including the US, to show a great deal of flexibility. So the real question here is, how can we enlarge North Korea's windset? One option is to increase the cost of no deal situation for the North Koreans. Second option might be we should convince the North Koreans that we do not have a great deal of flexibility in changing the scope of the windset so that we can secure a bargaining advantage. Third, disturbing key stakeholders in Pyongyang by presenting multiple incentives so that they can have heterogeneous interests among them. These options actually exist in theory, but I think what is important is to make sure that our reaction to North Korea's recent actions and recent rhetoric should be carefully coordinated between the US and US allies. And spreading anxiety about North Korea's nuclear and missile program gives North Korea more leverage on others in future talks. And showing heterogeneous interest sought by multiple actors is not really desirable. Well, the priority in dealing with North Korea's growing nuclear capability, I think, should be export control indeed. The current negotiation now between the US and North Korea puts a cap on testing, only testing of nuclear weapons and ICBMs, but it does not cover research and development of any kind. So we all should know that North Korea is focusing on developing new weapon system, and we may not delay or stop the R&D process, but mass production of these weapons system is a totally different issue. We may not stop, but we can certainly delay it. Because field deployment of this new type of system requires mass production, and therefore North Korea's ability to import all the necessary commodities becomes a key issue for the leadership in Pyongyang. When we look at North Korea's strategic trade, the trade of weapons grade and dual-use commodities, we'll know that there are import-only items that North Korea does not export at all, but import from the outside. Possibly due to lack of resource or technological prowess. Of course, I think missile-related strategic trade decreased after 2017. But still, partners of these kind of trade sold to North Korea lots of things like glass fiber, hardened steel, motors for engines, automatic data processing machines, and so on. There are a lot there. So if acquisition of these kind of commodities from outside no longer becomes available for North Korea, then we can somehow slow down North Korea's nuclear modernization. So in this regard, I think controlling strategic trade between North Korea and key partners needs our due attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Terry, please.
Thank you very much. And to join in some of the comments that were made, I think to go back to the Panmunjom Declaration, I think is an important starting point to lay out the differences between perhaps how South Korea and the Moon Jae-in administration has approached this from the United States. When you look at the last clause in the Panmunjom Declaration, it's denuclearization. Several steps before that have to be done to reach that as the final goal. But I think you saw in the United States, some, I think intentionally, as was pointed out with the Hanoi summit, that there's in the Trump administration some who argue it should be the reverse, and the quote unquote Libya model, and intentionally tried to promote that particular model, I think, because there was an intent to blow up the process. And of course it did succeed in a number of respects. I would say that I'm not very optimistic that, you know, in regards to the question of what conditions are going to be met. I think we are going to be waiting a while to see what some of those conditions might be and how long that might take. Certainly after the election is a given in many respects. When you add to that all the other difficulties the United States is working with the virus and some of the protests that we are seeing now. But even after the election is sorted out, and we'll talk about some of that later, I think that's going to be very challenging because, unfortunately, the politics don't line up very well in the United States to reach out to North Korea. And so I think there is very little political benefit for an administration to do that. In many respects, to have done what the Trump administration did to reach out to North Korea, I think was pretty unusual. And surprisingly, the folks that you would have expected to criticize a US administration for doing that, because it was Trump on the conservative side, were fairly quiet about that. I think for all of those things to line up in those conditions are going to be very difficult going forward. But again, we can talk about the election a little bit later. I think, frankly, what it may take to push the United States off of its dime, if you will, is another sort of 2018 gesture by Kim Jong-un, unfortunately, where in his New Year's speech, where he sort of offers an olive branch and gives a US administration some space to perhaps pursue this again. But whether that happens is another issue. With all of that said, I have long been skeptical that North Korea is going to be willing to give up its nuclear weapons under whatever circumstances are possible. I think it has certainly been worth the effort to try diplomatically. And as Vipin said earlier, military solutions to this are simply out of the question. And so in the end, I think we are going to end up having to figure out a way to manage this issue, to live with a nuclear North Korea. And what might we be looking at in sort of the interim? When I give talks about North Korea and the nuclear weapons issues, many folks will say to me, "Oh, Terry, come on. They're a nuclear weapons state. They're not going to give them up. Why don't we just accept that and move forward?" And certainly there's an argument there about if you can't reach a goal, which I, again, think that it's unlikely we can get to denuclearization, then you change the goal. But I think that is difficult because of the broader non-proliferation implications, not only for US policy, but internationally, what impact that has on the NPT. And so I think we are likely to see a continuation of an effort to try to reach denuclearization, even though that goal is going to become increasingly more difficult to reach. And so what we need to do is try to craft perhaps some sort of interim agreement that may perhaps be, to put it, as sort of the best we can get in this particular way, that might be something that is going to limit some of the capabilities that Professor Kim mentioned earlier, that we perhaps try to codify the testing moratorium, that we also address some of the conventional weapons issues that are part of that. I think we forget the North Korean conventional threat and some of the concerns there that need to be addressed, but that we're going to have to look at this in a very incremental, small set of steps. This is going to be a 10-year process, even to get something that may be sort of on the way to denuclearization. But again, I am not optimistic that we get to that. I think another way that we might do this is looking at the CMA as a framework to try to implement some of those different elements to that. But again, I think in the end, we may be able to make some progress on building a secure, stable security environment. But unfortunately, I'm afraid it's going to be with a nuclear North Korea. But I think that that's possible because strategically, we have been able to deter North Korea for the last 60 plus years. I think that can continue to be the case, even though, unfortunately, it's going to likely be with a nuclear North Korea. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Terry. Next, Dr. Sung Ki-young, please.
Thank you. Well, I think the biggest obstacle that has been hindering the resumption of the nuclear talks between the United States and the DPRK was fundamentally different perception on what the denuclearization means from the perspective of North Korea. First of all, what Kim Jong-un said when he received the South Korean envoys back in March 2018 was, we have no reason to possess nuclear weapons if military threat is removed and regime security is guaranteed. So what we need to remember is that the connotation of the Kim Jong-un statement at that time was not unilateral denuclearization, but conditional denuclearization, right? At the same time, the very first part of the Singapore Agreement reads, President Trump committed to provide security guarantees to the DPRK. And Chairman Kim Jong-un reaffirmed his commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Again, this is conditional commitment of Chairman Kim Jong-un, subject to Trump's commitment for security guarantee. However, if you look back what happened over the last 2 years, the United States has by and large been emphasizing tangible actions to implement denuclearization commitment, whereas they failed to show enough action plans on how to provide North Korea with regime security. In other words, among the 4 elements of the Singapore Agreement, apart from the repatriation of the Korean War, the remains of the Korean War prisoner of wars, only the denuclearization agenda was discussed between both parties. The first and second part of the agreement, which is establishment of the new US-DPRK relationship and permanent peace regime building, was not discussed at all from North Korean point of view. A special representative for North Korea, Stephen Biegun, stressed that we need to go back to the 4 areas of Singapore Agreement in his Atlantic Council speech before the US negotiators met with North Korean counterparts in Stockholm in October last year, but we didn't hear the peace regime and security guarantee issues were discussed in that meeting. This different perception between Washington and Pyongyang led to distrust between them. Kim Jong-un no longer trusts Trump's word. He wants to see his action to fully and simultaneously implement the 4 elements of the Singapore Agreement. Probably Kim Jong-un thinks that even if he gives up the nuclear weapons, there's no guarantee the United States would not invade North Korea like Iraq and Libya. He doesn't want to become the second Saddam Hussein or the second Muammar Gaddafi. So in response to Dr. Wu's first question, the recovery of trust between Washington and Pyongyang would be the first condition to resume diplomatic dialogue. And then they need to create consensus that this is a game to exchange denuclearization and regime security, not to implement Kim Jong-un's unilateral and voluntary declaration of the denuclearization. And with regards to Dr. Wu's second question, I think the freezing option plus suspension of producing fissile material would be a very ideal starting point to counter the growing nuclear capability of North Korea. But to be honest, I think it is highly unlikely to see this kind of development in the foreseeable future. What is more, freezing option itself still depends on what the United States will bring to the negotiation table with North Korea. Lastly, but not least, I think there is a widespread misunderstanding in Washington that the freezing option is a small deal, and a small deal is a bad deal. I think the freezing option as an initial measure for the comprehensive negotiation is not a big enough deal, but is a good enough deal to kickstart the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Song. Adam, please.
Thank you. And again, thank you for having me. I'm in substantial agreement with so many of the panelists that have spoken so far. In the last 2 years, I think we can all remember where we were 2 years ago in the moments leading up to the Singapore summit. And I think at that moment, it's not right to say that that was the moment of maximum leverage that the United States and its allies had. I think that moment had passed when the president accepted North Korea's invitation to negotiations rather abruptly. But I think that was the moment of the sort of the crest of momentum in nuclear negotiations with North Korea. And every week since then, it's grown more and more and more difficult to reach an agreement on nuclear weapons issues with North Korea. This is due to several reasons. One, as many commentators have noted, North Korea has been advancing its nuclear and missile arsenals pretty dramatically over the last 2 years. Though they've largely refrained from long-range missile tests, their short-range missile arsenals are developing very, very rapidly. I agree with Vipin that CAN-23 in particular, but also the large caliber artillery systems are extremely capable, extremely sophisticated, and those technologies will be transferred to the ICBM arsenal as well. I think it's only a matter of time before North Korea tests new ICBM designs, new rocket motor configurations, new capabilities for long-range missiles. Many analysts have been puzzled about why they didn't over the new year. There are sort of a number of hypotheses that we could offer, but I don't think that we're out of the fire yet. I expect North Korea will return to full testing, in the coming weeks and months and years. It's only a matter of time at this point. So another reason why it's grown more and more difficult is that the sanctions regime has proven additionally porous. North Korea has developed new measures to circumvent sanctions restrictions, possibly for sensitive materials like Dr. Kim mentioned, but certainly for economic transactions that help them fund and sustain the regime. Another reason is that trust has eroded tremendously. The Trump administration no longer places the same political priority on a win with North Korea. The Trump administration still uses North Korea summits as a major selling point in their re-election campaign. They see it as a win. But in part because of that, there's less attention, less staffing, less effort that's being devoted to arms control negotiations and reaching out to the Kim regime. So for all of these reasons, I think it's becoming more and more difficult to reach an agreement. That's not to say that it's impossible. So under what conditions would the US and DPRK resume diplomatic dialogue? It doesn't feel proximate. I think we'll have to wait a bit in the best of circumstances. I think someone would have to make a concession. I think the Trump administration or the Biden administration would have to signal that they're willing to put phased sanctions relief on the table. I think that Kim Jong-un and some of his negotiators believed that that was a reasonable proposal for them to make, and they expected that it would work, and they were disappointed and embarrassed when it didn't. So I think that's a necessity. There are probably some other measures that the United States would have to take there. The North Koreans would have to demonstrate that they were ready in the very near term to place significant restrictions on their nuclear and missile arsenals. So in that regard, what should the priority be in dealing with North Korea's growing nuclear capability? There are, as many different priorities for theirs as they have different systems. And you could sequence those in all sorts of different ways. There are several different agreements that the United States could, that would benefit the United States and its allies. I think the priority is that any agreement demonstrates tangible security benefits for the United States and its allies, and tangible benefits for North Korea as well. So that's to say that it shouldn't be symbolic. It shouldn't just be diplomatic. I don't think a a peace declaration is sufficient in and of itself. I think you need an agreement that makes the United States and South Korea on the one hand and North Korea on the other safer and more secure, or at least feel safer and more secure. So in terms of practical priorities, many in the United States would want to start with the ICBM arsenal. It would be, any other agreement would be criticized pretty heavily. As Terry mentioned, there were people who normally would criticize outreach to North Korea who abstained this time around because there was a Republican in the White House. Regardless of how responsible a Biden administration is in pursuing negotiations with North Korea, no matter how cautious, no matter how rigorous, no matter how hard-nosed, and those people will not shy away from criticizing the Biden administration next time around. That having been said, in my view, the priority should be these short-range missile arsenals. I agree with Vipin that there's value in dismantling Yongbyon, but KN-23 and those other systems, in my view, those are the systems that would be used in the opening minutes of a crisis and in a war. It's possible that that's also true of an ICBM, but I don't think it's necessarily true. So in my view, that those are the systems, the ones that they've tested over these last 2 years, that are most destabilizing and should be first, the first priority of the United States. That also has the benefit of saying, we did these agreements in Singapore, we had these discussions in Hanoi, you've advanced since then, and you've got to sort of roll back to that point if we want to sort of move forward from there. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I don't think that's necessarily feasible or realistic, but that's the kind of argument that an American administration will want to look for and will want to make. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Adam. Next, Mr. Park, please.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Let me first thank Sejong Institute for extending me this invitation to join today's meeting, and also thank Dr. Wu for moderating today's meeting. Despite all the difficult challenges that we all face, the management of COVID-19 being one among many, the early resumption of US-DPRK dialogue remains very much a relevant objective for the negotiating teams, both here in Seoul and in Washington. That being said, given the series of highly antagonistic reactions that came out of Pyongyang over the past few days, the question on the prospect of resumption of dialogue is, to be quite frank, a trying one. But no one expected this to be an easy task. In fact, almost exactly a year ago, President Moon Jae-in spoke in Oslo of the time needed for both sides to understand each other and thaw out hostilities that have persisted for over the past previous 7 years. In other words, as far as the negotiating teams are concerned, we fully recognize that this is a task requiring tremendous amount of patience and persistence. President Moon's words came on the occasion of then 1-year anniversary of the Singapore Agreement, an agreement in which the leaders of the US and the DPRK came together and documentized a set of agreements, one of which being the commitment on complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Since then, another year has passed by, obviously, and admittedly, this is not the situation that we wanted to be in. But at the same time, I would argue that the 2 years since the Singapore Agreement has not passed completely in vain. During those 2 years, we've seen President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un meeting face-to-face twice more, once in Hanoi and then again in Panmunjom, followed by working level negotiations in Stockholm. Throughout these interactions, both sides have had opportunities to communicate their positions and meet on various issues being negotiated. As for the United States, readiness to exercise flexibility has been indicated a number of times. Last December in Seoul, Special Representative Stephen Biegun himself indicated that the US was ready to reach balanced agreements that meet the objective of both sides. As for DPRK, withdrawal of US hostile policy against itself was put forward as a precondition for a meaningful dialogue. The latest statement from the first Vice Director, Kim Yo-jong, lately, also made it explicit that what she expects is a proposal that is fair and balanced, without ruling out the prospect of resuming dialogue with the United States. These statements are made, of course, against the backdrop of repeated reaffirmation of cordial and amicable relationship between the two leaders. So in sum, I believe that neither the United States nor DPRK have exhausted the space for diplomatic maneuver into the future. And respectfully disagreeing with Vipin, that perhaps the Hanoi was not the last opportunity for these two to get together. The need for the early resumption of US-DPRK dialogue is all the more dire when you consider the growing nuclear capability of DPRK. Since May of last year, it seems that DPRK has been focused on perfecting the delivery vehicle technology with short to medium range. Naturally, for ROK, we are keenly following the development of DPRK nuclear and missile technology, while maintaining firm readiness against any possible provocation based on US-ROK alliance. We are fully committed to address and resolve this issue through dialogue, and also all the need for the early resumption of those two to get together on the negotiating table. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Park. And I have some follow-up questions to everyone that, so what specifically can be exchanged between US and DPRK to reach a first meaningful deal? Or if you are a hypothetical deal broker, then what would you propose to both countries that this is going to be the first exchange between you guys? Why don't you start from Vipin this time?
I mean, I think as the program expands, I mean, there was a deal at Hanoi, but as Adam said, there has been an expansion of the portfolio of capabilities that North Korea has in its inventory. And I think the problem from the US perspective is that gives North Korea something they can trade away that they otherwise wouldn't have had to trade away at Hanoi. And I suspect that's what they will put on the table. It would be very smart for them to say, you know, I have these, three kind of equivalent capabilities. I'll put the, what do we call it? The chonky boy KN-25 on the table, and you give me some sanctions relief. And we're going to have to pay to get back to Hanoi and Singapore. And that, to me, is probably realistically where we are. But this is the mistaken thesis of the Trump administration, that time was on America's side and not North Korea's side. So in this intervening time, North Korea has built up more that it can trade away and still maintain the core of its program. But I suspect, if and when, the two negotiating teams or the two leaders, start communicating again, the contours of the deal, I think, will start looking like that, right? There'll be, we're going to pay a price to get back to where we were, and then, the question will be, well, what then will it take to get Yongbyon back on the table, or some of the ICBMs? And I think then the price becomes quite hefty.
Thank you, Professor John, please.
We know what DPRK is ready to trade away, and once Kim Jong-un talked to his people, he declared that he was ready to stop production, testing, transfer of nuclear weapons, and ICBM test. That's he already declared that. And secondly, at the Hanoi, they are ready to trade away Yongbyon site. And altogether, I think there is some first measures that we could probably get from the DPRK side if the price is right. Then what will be the price? I could say just reciprocal measures, I think DPRK, politically and symbolically, they want really US DPRK diplomatic normalization. So I'm strongly suggest that the US should declare that they are going to start US DPRK diplomatic normalization negotiations and probably meet once. And then maybe that's up to the further progress up to the progress of denuclearization. But mostly, but materialistically, DPRK still wants a lot of assistance and food, medical, energy. So having some humanitarian food assistance could be provided, possibly in advance, and then also there should be packaged together with some exemptions on other export and import that could be related to their livelihood, and could be including some energy part and increasing the ceiling of their energy import. I think those kind of packaging with a political, economic, and humanitarian and assistance, and could be a part of this first exchange measures. But one of my concern here is that without having much bigger pictures, what we could get from the DPRK and what we could provide to the DPRK, both sides could be in a difficult situation to sell to their domestic audience. Because when we have certain deal, always say that we are going to have some deal and they recognize DPRK nuclear problems. And then from the US side, that DPRK is just cheating on us. They get something and then they forgot everything. So we need to have some bigger roadmap, what it's going to be like, and could be showing some end state or middle state. Then altogether could be much better situation to both sides to exchange their packages. And my final kind of notion of a kind of caution here is that in the past, our US DPRK negotiation was never driven by vision or incentives or something for the good of both parties. That was always driven by crisis. So, I expect that there could be, things are deteriorating at the moment. And then if it deteriorates further, there could be much stronger incentives from both sides. We need to, have this, we need to avert this crisis. There could be another, kind of a situation that could accelerate, unfortunately, these negotiations. I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Kim, please.
Yes, I agree with Professor John on the significance of opening up Yongbyon facility. But I think the end state should be clear. That is dismantlement of the entire nuclear program in the North. But if we have to start from Yongbyon and then give North Korea some incentives, well, I think we can subdivide the process of sanctions lifting, for example, because North Korea is subdividing their steps. So let's say that we give 3 months deadline for North Korea to accept an inspection team from the outside and complete initial verification at the Yongbyon facilities. In return, we can calculate yearly demand of the crude oil for the North Koreans, for example, and allow import of 1/4 of the total amount that is for 3 months. And then we can review North Korea's compliance and decide whether to continue sanctions lifting or not. What I'm saying is, if we are very much concerned about a cheating problem, then we should seriously think about how to overcome this problem, not just complaining about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Perry, please.
Sure. I think one of the key pieces that a number of you have touched on already is that there was some degree of trust between the two governments when this process first started, but that has eroded significantly. And I think that's going to be a first challenge to have to try to recreate some degree of that, because we're talking about some very serious security issues on the table here. And I think Adam hit this just right before when he talked about how the deal, and again, you know, this is going to be a series of many, many small deals, is going to have to be something that domestic politics is going to be crucial on both sides, that they can go back and be able to sell that this has markedly, or not markedly, in a small way, improved our security situation. And that is going to be a challenge. But again, I think that is a key piece to this that has to be dealt with. I think certainly the United States is going to need to be more flexible in regards to some level of sanctions relief, because, you know, I mean, the last 2 years or so, we have had all sorts of things on the table about, you know, what does denuclearization mean, a peace treaty, normalization of relations. You know, I'm not so sure those are necessarily the most important things on Kim Jong-un's list of priorities. I tend to believe it's much more about sanctions relief than it is perhaps some of these other items. And the United States is going to have to be a bit more flexible on that. But again, it's going to need to get something in return. One other piece that has not come up yet in the context of a number of things that have been mentioned is there are going to need to be some level of verification protocols on any of these issues. And that's going to be another tough hurdle to be able to get something that is going to be sufficient for assuring the United States and South Korea, but also that won't be so intrusive that North Korea will not agree to those. And I think that's another big challenge.
Thanks, Terry. Dr. Sung Ki-young, please.
Well, frankly, I don't want to be a deal broker on this, one of the toughest negotiations on earth. So instead, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on inside North Korea. The top priority of the North Korean leadership this year is how to manage domestic conditions. Since the party plenum at the end of the last year, North Korea has been perfectly consistent in emphasizing the importance of self-rehabilitation and self-enrichment and hands-on breakthrough and so on and so forth, which implies the urgency of its economic survival under the prolonged international sanctions. What's more, the unexpected COVID-19 problem created another big burden in governing the country. The number of Kim Jong-un's open and public activities, on-site guidance was dramatically decreased compared with the last years. Instead, in contrast, foreign policy in North Korea is highly marginalized. We still don't know who will be in charge for the denuclearization talks with the United States. Lee Sun-kwon, the longtime military hardliner, was appointed foreign minister earlier this year in January, but 5 to 6 months have passed, but there is very few story on what he has been doing. So I think we need to consider that North Korea is not prepared to exchange something with the United States.
Thank you. Now, Adam, please.
Regrettably, I have to agree with Dr. Sung, which is to say that regardless of the approach that the United States or Seoul makes to North Korea, I think the likelihood is that they will opt to retain their nuclear arsenal for the foreseeable future. And that we do have to approach the problem set from the perspective of that base assumption, that we will be living alongside a nuclear-armed North Korea, and we will have to deter and contain them, constrain their activities, and try to transform their society as best we can within that assumption. That having been said, I think that there was a deal on the table at Hanoi that was worth exploring, and we didn't do so significantly. I agree with Vipin that the goal of the United States will be to try to get back to that deal, right? We do this over and over. We reject the deal that's on the table, and then a few years later, it looks a lot better to us than it did at the time. That having been said, the cost of that deal has gone up. And it's a cost that will be very difficult for an American president to pay. So, you know, I sort of gave some comments before about where we should start. I do agree that there's a way to sort of make exemptions for certain sanctions, some of which might even be in our benefit to do if we're interested in transforming North Korean society in a more beneficial and more stable route over the long run, to sort of make conditional exemptions to certain sanctions, to lift certain sets of sanctions, and then to sort of provide broader economic relief. You know, I think that it's worthwhile to establish a pathway and then to take steps to try to make that commitment credible. But the bottom line is we'll have to see security benefits from any interim agreement at each step of the way, and so will North Korea.
Thank you, Adam. Mr. Park, please.
In Hanoi, United States and DPRK came very close to the verge of an agreement. If reached, would have probably been of very much a historical significance. The records of the Hanoi negotiation indicates that the two sides have conducted an extensive discussion on a wide range of issues of mutual interest. They were told to have been intense, constructive, and even friendly. The reason for coming short of an agreement at the time was due to the divergent view on the very key issue of denuclearization and corresponding measures. All told, while Chairman Kim was willing to dismantle the entire Yongbyon facility and in return demanded the retraction of United Nations Security Council sanctions related to the livelihood of its people, President Trump expected more concession from Chairman Kim. So should a dialogue resume between the United States and DPRK, my guess or my hope would be that the two sides will naturally revisit the last conversation that they had in Hanoi. And between DPRK's demand for a new calculus and the US's willingness to exercise flexibility, I think there is a certain room for reaching a convergence. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn a mic over to Ms. Jung for questions to our panelists this morning, I think Dr. Kim Jina and Dr. Sung Kyung has to leave this room for another commitment. So so say bye to Dr. Kim and Dr. Sung, and we will proceed to the questions from Ms. Jung. Okay,
Thank you
bye.
very much for having me today.
Thank you, Dr. Kim and Dr. Sung. And now I'll ask Ms. Jung Jae-in of JTBC to ask questions to our panelists. Ms. Jung, please.
So thank you very much for all your insights. So I have a question for our panelists from the US. So it was slightly touched during the session, but with the presidential election coming up in the US, do you think the President Trump would make some gestures towards North Korea before the election? And if so, what kind of gestures would President Trump make towards Kim Jong-un? Thank you.
So why don't we, since this is a question for American panelists, I'll ask Adam, Terry, and Vipin to answer in this order. Please, Adam.
I don't expect further overtures to Kim Jong-un before the next presidential election. Political issues in the United States have been overwhelming over the last couple of months. The pandemic is still raging here in the United States. We look like we're set for another peak of cases and infections over the next couple of weeks and months. And then you've seen racial tensions and widespread protests in the United States that have also been major political issues. So North Korea has slipped off the agenda. To the extent that the Trump administration has been focused on arms control issues, it has been a trilateral strategic arms control deal with China and Russia, which is unfortunately, it's another fool's errand, but that's where a lot of the bandwidth in the Department of State and Defense and in the White House for arms control issues is going. There's a limited pool of expertise in the US government, especially given that the Trump administration has downsized the National Security Council and certain offices in the State Department. And that's where a lot of that expertise is going these days. I don't think it's impossible, you know, heaven knows what Donald Trump will do when he wakes up in the morning, but I think it's relatively unlikely given the magnitude of everything else that's going on and the need to secure re-election.
Thank you, Adam. Terry, please.
Yeah, not much to add to that because I agree that I think it is very unlikely. I think as well to add, I mean, typically foreign policy doesn't get that much focus in US presidential elections anyway. And then certainly not Korea, unless North Korea is doing something to fill the front pages with testing and other sorts of things like that. So you put all of that together, I think it is highly unlikely that, you know, given the bandwidth that this administration has to deal with all sorts of other things, plus the lack of importance of foreign policy overall, that it's going to be a focus. I think, you know, the interesting question is what happens after the election, and you know, that's another question, because clearly, and I touched on this a little earlier in regards to the interesting sort of reversal of politics on this issue, because President Trump has seized on this issue as a very personal issue to him, that his personal investment in this issue is what is interesting, that has driven this so far, and maybe what continues to do this if he is reelected in a second term. But that, you know, is a big question mark at this particular point as well.
Thank you, Terry. Vipin, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's highly unlikely that President Trump will do anything to disturb the process now, because, I mean, he's going to take what he's told the country is a win and bank it before November. I mean, for him, we'd be at war if Hillary Clinton was president. We almost went to war in 2017. President Obama told him when he came into office, this was your #1 challenge, you know, and so President Trump has told himself, I think he has deluded himself into thinking, and he's told his base that this is a win. And I think there's no chance that he sets himself up for anything between now and then that undercuts that narrative, #1. I agree with Terry completely that I have no idea what's going to happen after the election. But I think it's also important to note that, you know, Kim Jong-un so far seems to have behaved exceptionally rationally. And if I'm Kim Jong-un, I say, you know, there's nobody I'd rather have in the White House than Donald Trump. This guy sends me love letters. He checks in on me when I'm, you know, hiding out from COVID or getting, you know, stented. It's not, you know, we still don't know where he was. And so, you know, there's a world in which, you know, a Biden administration is a nightmare in a lot of ways for Kim Jong-un, because President Biden would, you know, strengthen the alliance with South Korea while President Trump is weakening it. President Trump is Kim Jong-un's greatest gift right now. And so my question is, does Kim Jong-un do anything between now and November to embarrass President Trump or humiliate him by testing anything, let alone what may be a solid fuel ICBM? I think the rational part of, you know, if the rational choice person in me says no chance, but there's a lot about North Korean domestic politics we don't know. We have no idea what kind of pressure Kim Jong-un is under. And, you know, it will be a surprise to me if Kim Jong-un or North Korea tests something provocative. But I think that might tell us a lot about what's going on in North Korea if that happens, because I think my baseline expectation is for Kim Jong-un, this is a marriage made in you know, Bellagio heaven. What is it? No, Trump Tower heaven. So I don't think there's any chance that Kim Jong-un would try to rock the boat, and President Trump doesn't want to rock the boat. And if there's any deviation from that, that might tell us a lot about the domestic politics, especially in North Korea.
Thanks, Vipin. Ms. Jung, your next question, please.
Yes, I have now a question for our Korean panelists. Well, recently, North Korea has shut down all communications with South Korea, and said it will never sit down with South Korea again. So I'm sure that the South Korean government is closely working with the US government about this matter. how does the US evaluate the recent North Korea's behavior, and also does the US have any kind of solution that to settle this down, suggestions that suggested to our government side? Thank you.
I think this question is more to Mr. Park, but I invite Dr. John to share your thoughts on the recent issue caused by North Korea. Dr. John, please.
I just want to make a very short comment. I think DPRK is, this is what the DPRK shows, its own frustration. And we somehow expect much better relations and much deeper engagement and cooperation economically and in every sense. And even our president tossed away some of our ideas, how do we engage economically and otherwise. But there was nothing was really delivered to the DPRK. And everybody knows that though its backdoors with China is open, but still DPRK has economic difficulties and food difficulties, and everybody expected that their coronavirus treatment is probably could be much a bad situation. So I think they were expecting much more than what they are facing right now. But on the other hand, we somehow our people in Korea continue sending this leaflet that DPRK it's kind of humiliating the Kim Jong-un and his family. So DPRK it's showing its own anger and frustration, and it's going to continue. I think for the time being, it's going to continue. Especially when the Kim Yo-jong said. But on the other hand, the DPRK is very one on the other hand very flexible. When the DPRK, the top level, especially Kim Jong-un didn't say much. So when he changed, his people below him could change anything, and there is someone nice, bad cops, good cops. But Kim Jong-un, when he's ready to change his mind, he's going to show up. And just making another comments on this, whether Kim Jong-un is not going to make any gesture to the U.S. Of course, I agree with you gentlemen that DPRK is very good at in the waiting game, and and especially this presidential election year, they just they just wait, instead of betting anyone. But I think from the DPRK's point of view, Trump is a very good partner to go with. In that case, I believe that he's could have some sort of another small deal that could be seen as some economic accomplishment. So far, in my knowledge, Trump has accomplished almost very little, and this his own personal praise for his accomplishment in the negotiation with the DPRK has its own limits. So there could be some I couldn't shut down the door completely. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor John. Mr. Park, please.
Yes, in response to Ms. Jung's question, our team maintains a very professional and close relationship with our counterparts in Washington. We maintain daily contact, sharing our assessment and coordinating our efforts to move forward. So certainly the latest developments coming out of Pyongyang is of keen interest of both our team and that of the one in Washington. United States has long been publicly supportive of progress in inter-Korean relations. So the series of harsh rhetoric targeted at our efforts to improve relations with Pyongyang is met with disappointment from our colleagues in Washington. And on this point, it is interesting to note that the statement from the Director General of American Bureau of DPRK Foreign Ministry that came out only a few hours ago early morning here. In response to to Washington's disappointment, was interesting in that, in contrast to the other statements that's coming out, mostly arising from Madame Kim Yo-jong's rhetoric. In contrast to that, it was rather very methodic and analytical. And most importantly, as Professor Chun had pointed out, he made it clear that the DPRK has not completely closed down the door for further dialogue with Washington. So neither Seoul nor Washington is discouraged to the point of throwing in the towel. We do intend to maintain a steady course towards early resumption of dialogue between United States and DPRK.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for all joining us in this session, and especially my friends in the East Coast of the United States in late evening. And I hope that our efforts in the policy community will bear a fruit, not in a distant future, on this issue. And with that, and I will conclude the session this morning in Seoul and evening in the East Coast of the United States. Thank you and bye.